Hello, I'm Richard Parker, and I will be speaking tonight about my new book, Wicked Western Kentucky. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me, and I'd also like to thank Bobby Wrinkle and the rest of the library staff for having me tonight to discuss my new book, Wicked Western Kentucky. So I started on this book around March of last year and aimed to write a different kind of history than I have before, and the book focuses on Paducah's dark side. So the book covers around 15 chapters around Western Kentucky, and 6 of these topics relate directly to Paducah. So they are Mickey and Wiley Harp, the Darnell and Lane feud in Fulton County, Jesse James, Shelby Jenkins Taylor feud in Ballard County, Isaac Wolf Bernheim, the Castle on the Cumberland, George Devil Winston, Buckskin Bill's Wild West Show, Prostitution in Paducah, the Night Riders, Pool Road Murders, Western Kentucky Moonshine, the Murder Mansion in Bowling Green, and Leslie Irvin and Rod Ferrell. So the 4 topics that I'll be discussing tonight in this presentation are prostitutes in Paducah, Pool Road Murders, Western Kentucky Moonshine, and Rod Ferrell and his vampire clan. All right, so the first chapter of the book that I would like to share today or tonight is about prostitution in Paducah, or what the local papers labeled disorderly houses. And I think this was a way that the papers kind of eased what was really going on and behind the scenes. So they say prostitution is the oldest profession known to man. Paducah's location on the confluence of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers made it a logistical dream location for the world's oldest profession. During the city's heyday in the late 1800s and early 1900s, thousands of travelers visited the city via the steamboat and the railway. Among many other cities on the Cumberland, Ohio, Mississippi, and Tennessee rivers, Paducah was not alone as a destination for those seeking an indulgence. In 1916, Paducah's prostitution problem was so bad, a government health commission was formed and published a completed report documenting the practice and how many men and women were involved. Coupled with the ease of women willing to work in the scandalous service, accessibility to disorderly houses where prostitutions worked, and the lackadaisical nature of the city's authorities, Paducah was known as the place to go for a wicked time. So the place where most of this occurred at was Court Street, which is now Kentucky, which runs through the back of the library from Water Street all the way down until you get to the hospital. So this was the place to be if you were looking for a good time. Back in the late 1890s and early 1900s, some may say that it was Paducah's red light district that attracted a majority of the town's visitors. One of Paducah's most famous brothels was located at 1042 Court Street and was owned by Vic Ballot. Ballot often hired musicians to come play for her clients, establishing a private club atmosphere. Another infamous Paducah madam was a woman named Molly Neef, who operated a disorderly house in the 900th block of Court Street. So ironically, both of these disorderly houses were near what is today McCracken County's health clinic. So Neef was so unabashful about her occupation that in the 1880s U.S. Census, she was listed as the madam of the house, while 4 other women were listed as prostitutes living at her address. This same 1880 census also noted 17 additional women were working as prostitutes in the 900 block of Court. There was a major attempt to clean up Neef's business in 1896 when community members filed an injunction to stop her from operating her business. The judge decided that the community members were correct and ordered Neef to close her doors. Neef filed for an appeal, and in the meantime, she raised her home to make way for a brand new boarding house. Neef won her appeal in 1898 after the decision of the lower court was reversed. So disorderly houses also disrupted the bonds of marriage, as is evident in the case of Emma Martin. Martin, a scorned wife, had such a problem with one disorderly house that she personally went to confront the women who were living there. The house was located at 3rd and Harrison Streets and was operated by 3 women. Martin alleged that the 3 women had seduced her husband into becoming a client of theirs. Once at the house, Martin started a fight with the women. The police eventually came and arrested Martin, who was fined $5 for starting the fight. The 3 women working at the house were fined for operating a disorderly house, which carried a $25 fine. In 1904, the Paducah government passed a half-hearted attempt to somewhat regulate prostitution with an ordinance that stated, "It shall be unlawful for any 2 or more common prostitutes to walk or be in company together on any street, sidewalk, alley, or other public thoroughfare in the city of Paducah during the nighttime." Fines ranged from anywhere from $5 to $50 for each offense. Dances were also a guise for prostitution, as they offered both the clients and ladies a chance to meet. Ben Boyd was charged with running a disorderly dance in the back of a saloon located on 10th Street. Paducah authorities felt Boyd was also running a disorderly house because of the large number of citizens who attended his dances and the women they attracted. Boyd's dances typically lasted until the early morning hours, which, as according to the papers, disrupted the prominent young women of the neighborhood. Boyd was found guilty and ordered to pay a $25 fine, which Boyd's attorney immediately appealed, and the newspaper stated that Boyd was found guilty because of his attitude, which the court said was sufficient to find him guilty of running a disorderly house. In 1916, a serious attempt to clean up the city occurred after Reverend Clinton S. Quinn, the chairman of a vice commission organized to examine Paducah's prostitution problem, issued a report that found the city had 64 disorderly houses. The report even said that for years, Paducah officials had tolerated the practice of prostitution. In their findings, the Vice Commission said that they had found hundreds of children living in these disorderly houses or playing nearby. The report listed the following findings that detailed the extent of Paducah's problematic profession. Paducah has 1 public prostitute to every 35 of her adult women population. Houses are located in every part of town except in the extreme West End. 50% of the inmates in the prisons have been infected with syphilis. 95% are at present or have been infected with gonorrhea. More than 600 cases of beer are sold in these houses each month. 50 to 75% of the profits from prostitution go directly to the madams. 90% of the profits from the beer goes to the madams. And the property owner makes anywhere from 125 to 150% more on his property if leased for the purpose of prostitution than for a legitimate use. Hundreds of children also play around these houses, absorbing the atmosphere. Boys under the age of 21 are frequent and regular customers. The average lifespan of a Paducah prostitution is 41 and a half to 45 years. 3,000 cases of gonorrhea and syphilis are treated by Paducah physicians a year. 17 madams do a business of $11,000 per month, which when I put that into an inflation calculator for today, came up to anywhere around $280,000. And then a conservative estimate of the money spent in the houses of prostitution in Paducah is $400,000, which again, once I put that in an inflation calculator, came out to about $3.8 million. So this was a very hefty and profitable service that was offered here. So after Quinn and his commission's great purge of prostitution in Paducah, the city took a hands-off approach to try to quell the practice. Several houses continued to serve the needs of patrons and received the acceptance from the city and community members who did not protest the presence of these houses. In the 1950s and early 60s, Paducah was a booming town, and it had a reputation for being a good place for a good time. Servicemen frequented Paducah, some coming in to town as far as from Fort Campbell, which is located on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, and one disorderly house located at 1111 South 3rd Street operated all the way up until the 1990s. Paducah's lackadaisical policies towards prostitution made the service a thriving underground business for a host of people who profited from its existence, from property owners, musical entertainers, madams, bartenders, and many others who all benefited from the service. Caught in the middle and often unpaid or paid very little for their work were the prostitutes. Paducah's weak prostitution laws often protected the solicitors and punished the prostitutes with fines and public condemnation as their names were published in the newspapers. These women were deemed wicked by the community despite a horde of others who were not shamed for their involvement in the practice. All right, so the next chapter that I would like to share with you all is Western Kentucky moonshine. And even though Kentucky's known for its Eastern Kentucky moonshine, Western Kentucky's history is right there up in terms of the same amount of stories, and it was an absolute thrill writing this chapter because there is so much on it that I found. So a lot of this chapter focuses on moonshiners down at Blood River and Callaway County, but I'm going to kind of highlight some of the stuff in this chapter focused on Paducah, and that's because Paducah was where most of the revenuers lived at. So the people who would actually go out and capture these moonshiners and make them pay fines and fees. So I'm going to tell you their story, and just a shout out to a fellow historian who kind of paved the way for this. Barry Craig did an outstanding interview with one of the old revenuers here and really helped tie this chapter together. So thank you, Barry, if you're listening. Moonshine and Western Kentucky go hand in hand. The Clear Spirit has several nicknames, including White Dog and the far Western Kentucky's White Mule. What separates legal and illegal whiskey is the required license, both federal and state taxes. Since the first settlers entered Western Kentucky, moonshine has been present and shared between residents at social functions. When Prohibition started and the demand for alcohol rose, Western Kentuckians quickly filled the void with their clear homemade liquor. Thousands of gallons of illegal moonshine were confiscated by revenuers throughout the state of Kentucky, including a large amount here in Western Kentucky. It is unknown how many people in Western Kentucky participated in the moonshine business, but it is clear from the newspapers that only a small amount of them were ever caught. So long before Prohibition started in Kentucky, revenue agents were busting people for distilling their own moonshine. A major moonshine still bust occurred in April of 1878 near New Concord in Callaway County. Deputy Collector Landrum of Mayfield, Kentucky, assisted by two special agents, made the bust near a hollow. A newspaper article in the Mayfield Democrat reported that it was the largest moonshine bust in the area. Landrum and his special agents found the still abandoned by its owner and decided to wait and see if they would return. Unfortunately for the revenue agents, the owners never returned to the still, but one of the agents discovered a small shanty a few yards from the still. The agents cautiously approached the location of the shanty, but one of the moonshiners heard the men and opened fire on them. The officers quickly returned fire, but were unable to track the men down and lost them due to the darkness of the night. The agents returned to the location of the moonshine still, destroyed both large stills, and emptied the mash barrels, which contained nearly 2,000 gallons of mash. The agents then set fire to the shanty as a warning against operating an illegal moonshine still. In 1921, in the most western part of Kentucky, a still was found on a farm in a log house near Barlow, Kentucky. The farm was owned by Wallace Martin, a local farmer who most likely was looking for a quick way to use his surplus corn. The county sheriff and a revenue officer were alerted to the moonshining operation by locals who noticed smoke coming from the log house's chimney. Locals knew that the log house had been vacant for some time. When the sheriff and the revenue officer arrived at Martin's farm, they found a large still, 2 barrels of mash, and 5 gallons of white mule. The two did not find anyone inside or on the property when the still was seized. The sheriff and the revenue officer launched an investigation to find who was responsible for the crime. Unfortunately, their investigation went nowhere, as the locals did not provide any information about the identities of the moonshiners. So, the sale of moonshine was not specific to men. Women also got in on the business, as a New York Times article published in 1930 tells us the story of Mary James Trotter. Mrs. Trotter, as the article refers to her, was a grandmother who lived in a small town called Mannington in Christian County. Miss Trotter made national news when she was sentenced in federal court here in Paducah for selling moonshine to help support her grandchildren. This was not Grandma Trotter's first time for being arrested for selling moonshine, as she had been arrested earlier in that same year. Miss Trotter stated in the article, it was stated in the article that Miss Trotter simply had to sell a little liquor now and then to take care of my 4 grandchildren. Miss Trotter's justification for breaking the law fell on deaf ears, as the federal judge Charles Dawson sentenced her to 6 months for her involvement in the moonshine trade. Miss Trotter even pleaded with Judge Dawson that she was too old to go to jail, saying that she was 69 years old. Judge Dawson paused and reminded Miss Trotter that she had stated that her age was 86 to the court. Miss Trotter replied, "Well, Judge, I'm mighty forgetful." Trotter served her sentence out at the Jefferson County Jail in Louisville, Kentucky. There was no place more famous for moonshine in western Kentucky, and maybe all of Kentucky, than Between the Rivers, located in Lyon and Trigg counties. The area had a booming illegal moonshine industry that supplied major Midwestern cities with alcohol during Prohibition. John Bays was Western Kentucky's head revenuer during Prohibition and was located in Paducah, a short drive from Between the Rivers. Later in life, Bays recounted his gallant tales to famed Kentucky historian Barry F. Craig in an interview that was published in the 1980 edition of the Journal of the Jackson Purchase Historical Society. Working as a revenuer agent for the alcohol tax unit, Bays patrolled the furthest 21 counties of western Kentucky. Most of Bays' work occurred in Between the Rivers area, patrolling for illegal moonshine operations. Arrested moonshiners was a fairly easy business for Bays, as most of the time, other moonshiners would reveal the locations of stills to undermine their competition. Bays contributed his success at catching moonshiners to his relaxed arrest policy that allowed the guilty party to come to his office at their convenience. Some of Bays' arrested moonshiners would immediately tell him the whereabouts of other stills to work out a deal for themselves. Others would inform Bay that they wanted to meet in a secret location so that the other moonshiners would not know that they were double-crossing their friends. Bays said, "Our best informants weren't the preachers or the temperance type, but the moonshiners themselves. They would tell on one another to eliminate competition because of a family squabble or because they didn't particularly like one another." Catching moonshiners was often a cat and mouse game, with both sides working hard to stay undetected from each other. Bays recalled agents wearing camouflage clothing and dark gray to blend into the woods. The residents also picked up on vehicles the agents drove and would alert the moonshiners to their presence in the area. To offset their detections, Bay recalled entering between the rivers from opposite ends. If he was going to bust a still in Lyons County, he would enter from Trigg County. They also entered Trigg and Lyon counties by rolling boats across the Cumberland and the Tennessee rivers and then hiking to their chosen moonshine still. Craig closed his interview with Bays saying that Bays maintains that he is never down a drop of moonshine. It's not that he is a teetotaler. It's just that he stated, Bays saying here, it's just that I saw too many dead mice and other trash floating in the stills. All right, so my third chapter, or my third topic that I'm going to be talking about tonight is probably overall one of my personal favorites from this chapter. And it was just, when I was researching topics for this, I kind of stumbled across this in the newspapers, the Paducah Sun, and very other Paducah papers. And just absolutely, this is one of probably Paducah's most unique tales. There's also a book out on Pool Road too that's really interesting. So this 2-mile stretch of road known as Pool Road in Paducah, Kentucky, could be the most dangerous road in western Kentucky. For more than a century, this small stretch of road has witnessed numerous murders, with many occurring in the last 10 years before the publication of this book. In the early 1900s, the road was home to several murders, all of which were shrouded in mystery due to the accessibility of the Illinois Central Railroad. This area of Pool Road was well known to police because of the hobos who traveled the freight trains of the Illinois Central Railroad. Gamblers, drunks, and vagabonds called this portion of Pool Road their temporary home while visiting Paducah. In April 1910, a murder of unidentified young red-headed boy captivated the city of Paducah. The news of the murdered young man created such a hysteria that future Vice President Alben Barkley, who was the McCracken County judge at the time, telegraphed then Kentucky Governor Augustus Wilson, requesting him to offer a reward for information leading to the arrest of the murderers. The unsolved murder of the unidentified red-haired young man was the first in a line of numerous murders that still occur to this day. In the April 11th, 1910 edition of the Paducah Evening Sun, what would turn out to be one of the most bizarre news stories of the year appeared. The story described the murder of a young man between the ages of 18 and 20 who was clubbed to death in the early mornings of the previous day, April 10th. The murder took place outside of the Paducah city limits, 300 yards from the Illinois Central Railroad yard. The body was found by accident. Just a few hours after the murder, it was found by a resident of Pool Road named James Dobby, who stated that he found the body around 9 a.m. while searching for a missing cow. Dobby ran hysterically to his neighbor, R.L. Westbrook's house, and told him that he had found the body of a dead man near the woods. Dobby pointed to the location of the body, and Westbrook went inside to call the police. When the police arrived, they found a makeshift camp containing cans, sacks, and discarded lumber that was being used for firewood. Upon additional examination, they observed a trail of blood that led to the body of a white male in his late teens to early 20s. The murderer or murderers left a macabre scene, as they had stuffed the young man's mouth with leaves in an attempt to silence his pleas for help. The young man was left wearing only his brown socks, underwear, and 2 shirts. The body was found face up with the man's head coated in dry blood. Acting Coroner C.W. Emery noted that the body was still warm and that the man had been dead only 3 or 4 hours. Surveying the crime scene, Patrolman Henley Franklin and Coroner Emery found an oak club weighing 3 to 4 pounds and measuring 18 inches long that they determined was the murder weapon. The club was used to fracture the man's skull on the left temple behind his ear. Coroner Emery noted 4 separate blows to the young man's head, which was the cause of death. Aside from the murder weapon, detectives also found a pair of shoes and blood-stained trousers and underwear. Word quickly spread about the murder, and 100 residents showed up to help police look for evidence in the woods. Coroner Emery summons the jury that came to the following conclusion about the state of the body. We, the jury, find the body before us came to his death by being hit and beat over the head with a club. We find his head crushed. Having been killed by someone unknown to the jury. We also are unable to state the name of the man whose body we have before us. Undertakers Nance and Rogers escorted the body to the funeral home located on 6th and Broadway streets, right across the street near the Irving Cobb, which served as the morgue. By 12:30 p.m., the funeral home was swarmed with people who were curious about the murder and looking to help identify the young man's body. Despite people stating they had recently seen the man around Paducah, no one could positively identify the body, thus beginning the saga of the unidentified man from Pool Road. Soon, loved ones of every missing young man in the area were contacting police, the funeral home, or the coroner, wanting to view the dead man, which resulted in several misidentifications of the deceased. A Miss Maud, who lived in Rowlandtown, a small neighborhood in Paducah, initially identified the young man as Porter Shorty, as his nickname, Maxie. Shorty was a leather worker who was Maud's former boyfriend. Maud said that she might be mistaken, but the dead man resembled her former lover, Shorty. Shorty's brother, D.H. Maxie, called his brother, who was supposed to be in St. Louis, and confirmed that it was not him. So speculations ran deep as others viewed the remains of the deceased. One group of spectators said that the young man lived in Littlesville, Kentucky, and had come to Paducah from Gilbertsville, Kentucky. Residents of Littlesville who were present in Paducah, however, did not recognize the murdered young man. So after several misidentifications of the young man, including one where a mother identified this man as her son, which resulted to the body being shipped to Alabama and being buried, the police had no leads on identification of the man. They eventually arrested 2 suspects, but after about 2 years, they dropped the case. And still until this day, the identity of this young man and also his murderers is unsolved. So a very interesting story that is, if you're familiar with Pool Road, it's kind of close to the Beltline. It's a really cool road to go drive down. And thanks to our friend J.T. Crawford for taking this awesome picture of it after a storm one day with his drone. All right, so the final chapter I would like to talk about, the final chapter that I would like to talk about today is Rod Ferrell and his vampire clan from Murray, Kentucky. And this is one that I personally remember growing up near Murray, Kentucky on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. When Rod Ferrell and the rest of his vampire cult were arrested for murdering a friend's family, shockwaves reverberated throughout western Kentucky. Despite the warning signs, self-mutilation, animal abuse, and wild parties, the underground cult members from Murray, Kentucky went undetected by their parents and the community at large. As police started interviewing the cult members who were still in their teens, a clearer picture of their wicked crimes emerged. The teens talked about how they would sacrifice animals and drink each other's bloods during their secret rituals at various locations throughout western Kentucky. At just 16 years old, Roderick Ferrell instilled fear in the hearts of every parent in America when news broke that he was the leader of a small, homegrown vampire cult that murdered Richard and Naoma Ruth Wendorf. Murray, Kentucky in 1996 was known as a great place to live and was home to landmarks like the National Boy Scout Museum and Murray State University. Many residents of Murray could not believe something or someone so dark could emerge from their little slice of paradise. Further adding to the hysteria, Detective Mike Jump of the Murray Police Department told the media that the cult liked to cut each other's arms and suck the blood. They cut up small animals and sucked the blood. They honestly believed that they're vampires. Ferrell first met the Windorfs through their daughter, Heather, when Ferrell and his mother, Sandra Gibson, relocated to Florida from Murray. Ferrell was the Windorfs' worst nightmare as a friend of their daughters. He was not interested in school and preferred drawing morbid pictures about death and writing poems about suicide. He openly told his classmates that he was a vampire and drank blood from the small animals he killed. Ferrell often dressed in all black and wore an inverted cross and combat boots to class. Within his small network of friends, Ferrell went by the name Vasego, and he said that he was hundreds of years old. Ferrell's mother, Sandra, could not find stable work in Florida and had to make the tough decision to pack up and move Rod back to Murray. The two had just moved to Florida from Murray the previous year with hopes of starting a new life under the Florida sunshine. Once Ferrell and his mother returned to Murray, he did not lose contact with his friend Heather. Ferrell was never Heather's boyfriend, but he managed to convince Heather to tell him of her darkest fantasies, which included living with him and his friends as a family. The two often communicated over the phone and by mail. The Windorfs did not like that their daughter talked to Rod and would tell her to get off the phone if they discovered Heather was talking to him. When the Windorfs started receiving bills for hours of phone calls between the two, they finally ordered her to stop talking to him forever. The Windorfs' ultimatum did not set well with Vasego. Once Rod arrived in Murray from Florida, he quickly went to work recruiting members for his vampire cult. He would prey on fellow teenagers who, like him, came from unstable upbringings. To help recruit members, Ferrell started playing a role-playing game called Vamps, which stood for Victorian Age Masquerade Performance Society. As Vamps became more serious, Ferrell scared many of the group's members, and some quit the game. Left with a core group of followers, Ferrell plotted his next move, which mixed drugs and rituals with drinking each other's blood. The group often met at various locations such as cemeteries, old buildings, and their favorite hideout, the Vampire Hotel located in Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area, to perform their rituals and take part in drugs and alcohol. The Vampire Hotel served as the primary spot for Rod and his fellow vampires to perform their rituals under the Kentucky moonlight. Local folklore claims that before the vampire cult made the hotel their home, another group of older vampires was buried there. The remains of this house, and some sources say hotel, are located on a large steep hill overlooking the waters of Kentucky Lake. Among these ruins, Ferrell and his fellow vampires hatched their darkest plans to take their transformation as vampires to the next level. That next level occurred in October 1996 when Ferrell convinced his followers to break into the Murray's animal shelter. The group cut a 15-foot hole into the fence surrounding the animal shelter and mutilated 2 dogs. The incident immediately sent shockwaves throughout western Kentucky, and many people suspected cult-like activity was occurring in Murray. Murray Crime Stoppers offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the vandals. Police were immediately met with tips of a satanic cult operated in Murray. Ferrell was named via the Crime Stoppers tip line, and police arrested him and another teenager on Halloween. The two boys were charged as juveniles, and their names were not immediately released to the public. After Ferrell's arrest, the pressure was on, and everyone in Murray knew that some type of cult activity was occurring. In Florida, Heather was having a rough time handling her parents' mandate to stop talking to Ferrell. After not hearing from Heather, Rod began making preparations to run away from Murray to unite his Murray vampires with Heather. On November 22nd, the cult met at the Hardys in Murray to make their final preparations to run away to Florida to get Heather. Altogether, 3 other teenagers from Murray joined Rod as he left Murray. On November 23rd, Rod immediately took the group to Florida to meet up with Heather and some other friends. At first, the group stayed with another friend of Rod's that he had made while living in Florida, but that relationship quickly eroded. The friend witnessed the vampire cult sucking each other's blood and plotting killing the Windorfs for their Florida Explorer SUV. On November 25th, Ferrell finally made his move to kill the Windorfs and steal their car for use as a more reliable getaway vehicle. After the murders, the cult left Florida and traveled to New Orleans with the hopes of meeting other vampires. They were also interested in finding a voodoo doctor who could help give them supernatural powers. Police tracked the group's movements with the Windorf stolen credit card, which the group used at a Walmart in Tallahassee, Florida, to buy a knife. When they finally arrived in New Orleans, they became too scared to explore the city because they felt it was unsafe. Still on the run, the group headed towards Baton Rouge and broke into a house, stealing a shotgun, food, and other supplies. The group's mad dash across the Deep South finally ended when they were apprehended at a motel in Baton Rouge after a cult member called her family back in Kentucky. Rod was eventually found guilty of the murders and was sentenced to die in the electric chair, but in a 2005 U.S. Supreme Court decision spared his life, and his sentence was converted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court ruled that he was too young at the time of the murders to qualify for the death penalty. 3 vampire cult members were sentenced for their various roles in the murder, including Scott Anderson, Ferrell's right-handed man, who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years later, Anderson's sentence was cut down to 40 years because he was 16 years old at the time of the murders. Heather was not convicted for the murders of her parents because authorities felt that she did not know about Rod's plan to kill them. The rest of Murray's vampire cult shined a light on the various underground groups throughout the nation. Numerous media outlets and the prosecutors pointed their fingers at the music and board games the cult played that portrayed the dark and sadistic themes they worshipped. Western Kentucky was forever changed because of the national media attention bestowed on the small town of Murray. The vampire cult showed the residents of the area that even in the smallest communities, there was a dark and wicked force lurking around Western Kentucky. All right, so that includes the 4 chapters of my book. Again, like I said, that's just a little snippet of each one. There's actually a lot more that goes along with those 4 chapters, and including in total 15. So if you're interested in purchasing an autographed copy, you can visit my website right there, AtomicCityToursKY.com. They're also on Amazon and all major retailers, but you won't get an autograph with those. I also encourage you to join me this spring when I start back up my walking tours through my company, Atomic City Tours, which we have downtown walking tours of Paducah, and we're working on a trolley tour about the history of Coca-Cola here in our city. I will also be hosting a few special tours called Wicked Paducah, where we'll be talking about some of the Paducah-centric themes from my chapter and visiting some of the places that I discussed today. Again, you can purchase tickets for an autograph or purchase tickets to the walking tour via this website and the book. And I would just like to say thank you very much for listening to my presentation about my new book, and I hope you have a great night.